The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the marble steps of the Metropolitan Convention Center in downtown Chicago. Inside the grand ballroom, hundreds of business leaders and investors had gathered for the annual Global Energy Summit, where deals worth billions would be discussed behind closed doors and over champagne. Outside, the reality was starkly different. A bitter November wind swept through the streets, carrying with it the first hints of winter, and the harsh reminder that not everyone in this city lived in luxury. Jennifer Hayes stepped out of her black Mercedes, her designer heels clicking against the pavement with practiced confidence. At 37 years old, she was the picture of success, her tailored burgundy suit speaking of wealth and power without needing to shout it. Her dark hair was pulled back in an elegant chignon, and a simple strand of pearls worth more than most people's annual salary adorned her neck. She was married to Marcus Hayes, the founder and CEO of Hayes Energy Corporation, a company that had transformed from a regional natural gas supplier into a multi-billion-dollar enterprise controlling energy distribution across the Midwest and beyond. Jennifer had learned to navigate this world with grace. She attended the right charity galas, sat on the boards of prestigious foundations, and knew exactly how to smile for the cameras while discussing poverty alleviation programs. But there was always a distance, a carefully maintained barrier between her world and the reality that existed just blocks away from venues like this one. As she walked toward the entrance, her assistant trailing behind with a tablet and a schedule packed tighter than a rush-hour subway car, Jennifer's mind was already racing through the day's obligations. Marcus was inside, about to announce their company's expansion into renewable energy, a controversial move that had made them targets of both praise and criticism. Environmental groups celebrated their pivot toward sustainability, while competitors whispered that it was merely a publicity stunt to improve their image after years of fossil fuel extraction had damaged communities and landscapes alike. What Jennifer didn't know was that 3 blocks away, under the weathered overpass of the Green Line elevated train, a woman named Sarah Mitchell was making a decision that would change both their lives forever. Sarah was 28 years old, though the streets had aged her in ways that numbers couldn't capture. 6 months pregnant, she carried her swollen belly beneath layers of donated clothing that didn't quite fit, and a coat she'd found in a church donation bin. Her face, once bright with the optimism of youth, now bore the exhaustion of someone who had fought too many battles and lost more than she'd won. Her dark skin was chapped from exposure to the elements, and her hair, which she tried to keep neat despite everything, was pulled back under a worn knit cap. Sarah hadn't always been homeless. Just 2 years ago, she'd been working 2 jobs, taking night classes at community college, and dreaming of becoming a registered nurse. She had a small apartment in Bronzeville, nothing fancy, but it was hers. She had a boyfriend, Marcus, who promised they'd build a life together. Then came the pregnancy, unplanned but welcomed. Marcus disappeared the day she told him, and Sarah discovered that his promises had been as empty as her bank account would soon become. The eviction notice came 4 months later, after she'd missed too many shifts due to morning sickness, and her landlord decided she wasn't worth the trouble. The shelters were full, the waiting lists were months long, and suddenly Sarah found herself on the street with nothing but a backpack and a growing sense of desperation. She'd learned to navigate the invisible world of Chicago's homeless population, the networks of those who knew which soup kitchens served on which days, which parks were safe to sleep in, which police officers would look the other way, and which ones would roust you before dawn. The previous night, Sarah had been trying to find a warm place to sleep near the Riverwalk when she'd overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. 2 men, well dressed in expensive coats, were standing near a concrete pillar, speaking in low voices that carried just enough in the quiet night air for her to catch fragments of their conversation. She'd learned to make herself invisible, a skill honed by months of survival, and they hadn't noticed her huddled in the shadows nearby. The words she heard were chilling. Assassination, tomorrow afternoon, Hayes woman, convention center, multiple shooters, make it look random. Her first instinct was to run, to pretend she'd heard nothing, because getting involved in something like this could only bring trouble. But as she lay awake that night, her baby kicking against her ribs, Sarah couldn't shake the image of another woman, someone she'd never met, walking into danger completely unaware. By morning, Sarah had made her decision. She'd spent the day navigating the city, using what little money she had for train fare, asking questions, piecing together information. She learned that Jennifer Hayes would be at the Global Energy Summit, that she typically arrived mid-afternoon, that she would be entering through the main entrance. Sarah positioned herself across the street, watching, waiting, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. When Jennifer emerged from her Mercedes, Sarah saw her opportunity slipping away. She began crossing the street, her pregnant belly making her movements awkward, her worn sneakers slapping against the asphalt. Security guards near the entrance noticed her immediately, their hands moving toward their radios, their expressions shifting from professional alertness to suspicion. A homeless woman approaching a venue like this was always treated as a potential problem. Jennifer was halfway up the steps when Sarah reached the sidewalk. The security guards were moving to intercept her, but Sarah knew she had only seconds. She called out, her voice rough from months of disuse in polite company. Jennifer turned, more out of surprise than interest, her eyes taking in Sarah's appearance with a mixture of pity and discomfort. What happened next occurred in the span of heartbeats. Sarah saw the glint of sun on metal from a rooftop across the street, saw the barely perceptible movement that spoke of a weapon being raised. There was no time to explain, no time to warn, no time for anything but action. Sarah lunged forward, her hand connecting with Jennifer's face in a sharp slap that echoed across the plaza. The impact sent Jennifer stumbling backward, her carefully composed expression shattering into shock and outrage. Security guards rushed forward, hands reaching for Sarah. But then came the sound that explained everything. The distinctive crack of a high-powered rifle, followed immediately by the sound of shattering marble as a bullet struck the pillar, exactly where Jennifer's head had been just a fraction of a second before. Chaos erupted instantly. People screamed and scattered. Security guards drew weapons, shouting into their radios. Jennifer sprawled on the steps with her hand pressed against her reddening cheek, looked up at Sarah with eyes wide with incomprehension and dawning realization. Sarah, already being forced to the ground by security, met her gaze and said just 4 words that cut through the pandemonium. "They're trying to kill you." More shots rang out, this time from multiple directions. The convention center's security protocols activated, metal shutters beginning to descend over windows, reinforced doors slamming shut. Jennifer scrambled backward on the steps, her designer suit scraping against rough marble, her mind struggling to process what was happening. One of her security guards threw himself over her, but Sarah, pinned to the ground by 2 other guards, shouted again, her voice desperate and urgent. "The parking structure. They have another team in the parking structure. You can't go back to your car." The security chief, a former Secret Service agent named Rodriguez, made a split-second decision. He hauled Jennifer to her feet and began pulling her not toward the building's main entrance, but toward a service entrance on the east side. 2 other guards grabbed Sarah and, despite her protests, dragged her along. If this homeless woman knew details about the attack, they needed her alive to provide information. They burst through a service door into a stark concrete corridor that reeked of industrial cleaning supplies and old cigarette smoke. Rodriguez was already on his phone, coordinating with Chicago PD, with federal agents, with everyone he could think of. Jennifer, her shock giving way to a different kind of clarity, pulled away from the guards supporting her and turned to face Sarah. "How did you know?" Jennifer's voice was steady despite everything, the voice of someone accustomed to maintaining control even in crisis. "Who are you?" Sarah, breathing hard, her hands protectively cradling her pregnant belly, met her eyes. "My name is Sarah Mitchell. I overheard them last night. I didn't know if anyone would believe me. I didn't know what else to do." The service corridor led them through a maze of passages that most visitors to the Metropolitan Convention Center never knew existed. Rodriguez moved with military precision, his weapon drawn, his eyes scanning every corner and doorway. Behind him, 2 other security guards flanked Jennifer and Sarah, while a third brought up the rear, walking backward to watch for pursuit. The distant sound of sirens began to filter through the concrete walls, growing louder with each passing moment. Jennifer's mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Someone had tried to kill her. Not Marcus, but her specifically. The bullet had been aimed at her head, would have struck her perfectly if not for Sarah's intervention. She thought of Marcus still somewhere in the building, probably in lockdown with the other summit attendees. She thought of their daughter, Emma, who was 11 years old and at boarding school in Connecticut, blissfully unaware that her mother had just survived an assassination attempt. They emerged into an underground parking garage, the air thick with exhaust fumes and the echo of car engines. Rodriguez had called ahead, and an unmarked police vehicle was already waiting, engine running, 2 plainclothes detectives standing beside it with their badges displayed. The transfer happened quickly, Rodriguez giving rapid instructions to the detectives while helping Jennifer into the back seat. Sarah hesitated, uncertain if she was being rescued or arrested, but one of the guards gently but firmly guided her into the vehicle beside Jennifer. As the car pulled away, tires squealing on the polished concrete, Jennifer finally had a moment to truly look at the woman who had saved her life. Sarah was pressed against the opposite door, her hands still protective over her swollen belly. Her eyes darted between Jennifer and the windows, as if expecting danger to appear at any moment. Up close, Jennifer could see how young she was beneath the weathering that street life had imposed. She could see the dirt under her fingernails, the frayed edges of her coat, the shoes held together with duct tape. She could also see the intelligence in her eyes, the determination in the set of her jaw. "Tell me everything," Jennifer said quietly, her voice cutting through the tension in the vehicle. "Start from the beginning. What exactly did you hear last night?" Sarah took a shaky breath and began to speak. She described her night near the Riverwalk, the 2 men who had seemed so confident in their privacy, the fragments of conversation that had painted a terrifying picture. She described one man as tall, maybe in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and an expensive leather coat. The other was younger, 30s perhaps, with a distinctive scar running along his left jawline. They'd mentioned the Hayes woman, the convention center, the timing, the need to make it look like a random act of violence, perhaps terrorism, something that wouldn't immediately point back to their employer. "Did they mention who they were working for?" one of the detectives asked from the front seat, his eyes watching them in the rearview mirror. Sarah shook her head. They never said a name. But they talked about contracts, about someone who was willing to pay whatever it took to stop the renewable energy deal. They said their employer had too much invested in the old system, that Hayes Energy's transition would cost them billions. Jennifer felt a chill that had nothing to do with the car's air conditioning. The renewable energy announcement wasn't just a business decision, it was a declaration of war against entrenched interests in the fossil fuel industry. She and Marcus had known there would be pushback, had prepared for legal challenges, media campaigns, political pressure. But assassination, that was a level of desperation they hadn't anticipated. The car weaved through Chicago traffic, taking an indirect route to an undisclosed location. Rodriguez had contacted the FBI, and agents were already coordinating a response. The convention center was on full lockdown, attendees being held for questioning and protection. The parking structure was being swept for additional threats. Rooftops across the area were being searched for the shooter or shooters. But the immediate priority was getting Jennifer somewhere secure and debriefing Sarah for every detail she could remember. They ended up at a FBI field office in the Loop, a nondescript building that could have housed any number of businesses. Inside, they were hustled past security checkpoints and into a secure conference room with no windows and walls that likely contained enough technology to block any form of surveillance. An agent brought water and coffee, while another arrived with a laptop and recording equipment. For the next 3 hours, Sarah repeated her story again and again, each time being pressed for additional details. Did the men have accents? What exactly had they said about timing? Had there been anyone else nearby? Were there any identifying features? Any logos on their clothing? Any sounds that might indicate where they'd come from or where they'd gone? Sarah answered everything she could, her exhaustion growing more visible with each passing minute. Jennifer watched the interrogation with growing respect for this young woman who had risked everything to save a stranger. But she also noticed other things. The way Sarah winced when she shifted position, the protective hand that never left her belly, the barely concealed hunger in her eyes when the coffee and water arrived, but no food accompanied them. Jennifer quietly excused herself and spoke to one of the agents in the hallway. 15 minutes later, food arrived. Real food, not just vending machine snacks. Sandwiches from a nearby deli, fruit, juice, soup that was still steaming. Sarah's eyes widened, and for the first time her composure cracked. Tears streamed down her face as she reached for a sandwich with shaking hands, and Jennifer understood that this might be the first substantial meal Sarah had eaten in days. "When did you last eat?" Jennifer asked softly. Sarah swallowed a bite before answering, her voice thick with emotion. "Yesterday morning. The shelter on West Madison. They serve breakfast at 7. She paused, then added with bitter humor, "I missed lunch there because I was busy saving your life." The comment hung in the air, not accusatory, but simply factual, and Jennifer felt something shift inside her. How many times had she sat on charitable boards, approving grants for homeless services, reading statistics about food insecurity, nodding sympathetically at presentations about the housing crisis? How many times had she encountered people like Sarah on the street and looked away, uncomfortable with the direct confrontation of suffering that her wealth and privilege had insulated her from? By evening, the FBI had assembled a clearer picture. Using Sarah's descriptions, facial recognition software, and traffic camera footage, they'd identified one of the men she'd overheard. His name was Vincent Calabrese, a former military contractor with ties to several energy corporations, known in certain circles as someone who handled problems that required extreme solutions. The second man remained unidentified, but Calabrese's phone records were being subpoenaed, his known associates being brought in for questioning. The shooter on the rooftop had escaped, leaving behind only shell casings and a firing position that showed professional preparation. Analysis suggested at least 2 other positions had been established in the parking structure and an adjacent building, confirming Sarah's warning. This hadn't been a lone gunman, it had been a coordinated military-style operation. Marcus arrived at the field office near 8 o'clock, having been held at the convention center during the initial investigation. When he walked into the conference room and saw Jennifer, his carefully maintained CEO composure shattered. He pulled her into his arms, and for several minutes they simply held each other while agents politely looked away. When they finally separated, Marcus's eyes found Sarah still sitting at the conference table, looking small and exhausted despite her pregnant belly. "You saved my wife's life," Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion. He crossed to Sarah and extended his hand. "Thank you doesn't seem adequate, but thank you." Sarah shook his hand, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Jennifer interjected firmly. "Most people would have walked away. Most people would have convinced themselves it wasn't their problem, or that they must have misheard, or that someone else would handle it. You put yourself at risk, came to a place where you knew you'd be treated with suspicion, and saved my life anyway." "That's not what anyone would do, that's what a hero does." Sarah looked away, blinking back fresh tears. "I'm not a hero, I'm just someone who couldn't live with herself if I'd done nothing." The FBI wanted to place both Jennifer and Sarah in protective custody until they could determine the full extent of the threat. Marcus would go into protection as well, and Emma would be collected from her boarding school by federal agents and brought to a secure location. But there was a problem. Sarah had nowhere to go after this was over, no address to provide, no next of kin to contact. She was, in every legal and practical sense, invisible to the systems that were designed to protect people like Jennifer. Jennifer made a decision. "Sarah will stay with us. Wherever we're going, she comes too. And when this is over, she'll stay at our home until we figure out a better situation." Marcus didn't hesitate. "Agreed. Sarah, your family now." "We take care of family." Sarah looked between them, disbelief and hope warring on her face. "You don't have to do that. I don't want charity. I just wanted to do the right thing." "This isn't charity," Jennifer said firmly. "You saved my life. That creates a bond whether you want it or not. Besides, you're 6 months pregnant and living on the street. I have resources, space, and a daughter who would be ashamed of me if I didn't help. So you're staying with us and we can argue about the details later." They were driven to a safe house in Evanston, a large home in a quiet neighborhood that the FBI maintained for witness protection situations. Security was tight, with agents stationed outside and sophisticated surveillance monitoring every approach. Inside, the house was comfortable, but impersonal, furnished with items that looked expensive but felt like they'd come from a catalog rather than being chosen with love. Sarah was shown to a bedroom on the second floor, and when she saw the private bathroom with its clean towels and working hot water, she broke down completely. Jennifer found her 20 minutes later, sitting on the edge of the bed in borrowed clothes, her hair still damp from a shower that had probably lasted longer than was strictly necessary, crying with a mixture of relief and exhaustion and overwhelming emotion. Jennifer sat beside her and did something she hadn't done in years. She simply listened. Sarah talked about her life before homelessness, about her dreams of becoming a nurse, about the boyfriend who'd abandoned her, about the slow cascade of setbacks that had led from missing a few shifts to eviction to the street. She talked about the fear of giving birth while homeless, about the terror that her baby would be taken away by child services, about the desperate hope that somehow things would get better, even as each day made that seem less likely. "I used to think that people were homeless because they made bad choices," Jennifer admitted quietly. "That if they just worked harder, made better decisions, they could pull themselves up. I was wrong. You didn't make bad choices. You just didn't have enough margin for error, and when things went wrong there was no safety net to catch you." Sarah nodded, wiping her eyes. "Most people are one or two disasters away from where I am. They just don't know it yet." That night, Jennifer lay awake in another unfamiliar bedroom, listening to Marcus's steady breathing beside her. She thought about the bullet that should have killed her, about the split-second intervention that had saved her life, about the young woman sleeping down the hall who represented both her salvation and her failure. Sarah had saved her life not despite being homeless, but perhaps because of it. Living on the street had taught her to notice things others missed, to trust her instincts, to act decisively when action was required. Jennifer made a silent promise to herself and to Sarah. This wouldn't end with simple gratitude and a temporary place to stay. She would use her resources, her connections, her influence to ensure that Sarah had a real chance at the life she'd been dreaming of. And maybe, if she was lucky, she'd learn something about courage and resilience from someone who'd been invisible to her until the moment that woman had slapped her face and saved her life. Before we continue to the final block, I want to ask you something important. This story is about seeing people who society has made invisible, about understanding that heroism doesn't wear expensive clothes or live in mansions. If you've ever walked past someone experiencing homelessness and wondered about their story, or if you've ever felt invisible yourself, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever helped a stranger when it would have been easier to look away? Drop your story below. I read every single comment, and your experiences matter to this community. And if you're finding value in this story, please subscribe to the channel. We share stories that challenge us to be better, to see deeper, to act with more courage. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell, because we're building a community of people who believe that every person has worth and every act of kindness matters. The investigation moved swiftly over the next 48 hours. Vincent Calabrese was found in a warehouse on the south side, dead from what appeared to be a self-inflicted gunshot wound, though the FBI suspected it was staged to look that way. Dead men tell no tales, and whoever had orchestrated the assassination attempt was eliminating loose ends. His phone had been wiped, his laptop destroyed, and any paper trail that might have led to his employer had been carefully erased. The second man Sarah had described remained a ghost, unidentified despite the FBI's considerable resources. But the attempt on Jennifer's life had exposed something larger and more disturbing. As federal investigators dug deeper into Hayes Energy Corporation's business dealings and the renewable energy transition, they uncovered a web of threats and intimidation targeting not just Jennifer and Marcus, but other executives in the sustainable energy sector. 3 other CEOs had received anonymous death threats in the past month, a wind farm developer in Texas, had survived a suspicious car accident. A solar panel manufacturer in California had their facility destroyed in an arson attack that investigators now suspected wasn't random vandalism. Someone, or more likely some coalition of interests, was waging a shadow war against the renewable energy transition, and they were willing to kill to protect their investments in fossil fuels. Marcus spent hours in secure video conferences with attorneys, board members, and federal investigators. The question everyone kept asking was whether Hayes Energy should proceed with the renewable energy announcement or pull back, at least temporarily, until the threat could be neutralized. Some board members argued for caution, for waiting, for not making themselves bigger targets than they already were. But Marcus, with Jennifer's full support, refused to be intimidated. "If we back down now, we're telling them that violence works," Marcus said during one heated conference call, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd made an irreversible decision. "We're telling every other company considering this transition that they'll be targets too. We move forward, we protect ourselves as best we can, but we don't let them win by making us afraid." Jennifer watched her husband during these moments and felt a surge of pride mixed with fear. They'd built their fortune on natural gas extraction, had profited enormously from the very systems they were now pledging to transform. The renewable energy pivot wasn't just about profits or public relations, it was about legacy, about what kind of world they wanted to leave for Emma and her generation. But it came at a cost, and that cost was becoming increasingly clear. Sarah, meanwhile, was adapting to life in the safe house with a mixture of disbelief and cautious hope. The FBI had assigned her a protective detail as well, since she was now a material witness in a federal investigation and potentially a target herself. She spent her days being interviewed by investigators, looking through photo arrays of potential suspects, working with a sketch artist to refine descriptions of the men she'd overheard. But she also spent time with Jennifer, and in those conversations, a genuine friendship began to form. They were sitting in the safe house kitchen on the third morning, drinking tea and watching dawn break over Lake Michigan in the distance, when Sarah finally asked the question that had been bothering her. "Why did you really invite me to stay with you? I mean, beyond the obvious. You could have set me up in a hotel, given me some money, made sure I was okay without actually involving yourself in my life." Jennifer considered the question carefully before answering. "When you slapped me in that moment before I understood what was happening, I looked at you and I saw someone I'd walked past 1,000 times without really seeing. I saw someone I'd dismissed as a problem to be managed through charitable donations and policy initiatives, not as a person with their own story, their own dignity, their own heroism. You forced me to see you, Sarah, and once I truly saw you, I couldn't unsee you. Does that make sense?" Sarah nodded slowly. "I think so. It's like when I first became homeless. Suddenly I realized how invisible I'd become to people who used to smile at me when I was working at the hospital, wearing scrubs and looking respectable. The moment I was on the street, I disappeared. Same person, different circumstances, completely different treatment." "Exactly," Jennifer said. "And I was one of those people who looked away. I'm ashamed of that, but I'm trying to do better. You're not a project or a charity case. You're someone who saved my life, yes, but you're also someone who deserves the same opportunities and dignity that I take for granted." On the fourth day, Emma arrived at the safe house, accompanied by 2 FBI agents who'd collected her from boarding school. At 11 years old, she was all long legs and curious eyes, with her father's dark hair and her mother's determined chin. She'd been told that there'd been a security incident, but had been shielded from the full details. When she walked into the safe house and saw her mother, she ran across the room and buried herself in Jennifer's arms. "Mom, they wouldn't tell me anything. Are you okay? Where's Dad? What's going on?" Jennifer held her daughter close, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, feeling the reality of how close she'd come to never holding her child again. "I'm fine, sweetheart. There was an incident, but I'm safe. Dad's safe. Everything's going to be okay." Emma pulled back, her eyes scanning her mother's face for truth. Then her gaze shifted to Sarah, who was standing awkwardly near the kitchen doorway, clearly unsure whether she should give them privacy or stay. Emma's eyes widened as she took in Sarah's pregnant belly, her young face, the obvious signs of hardship. "Who's that?" Emma asked with the directness of childhood. "That's Sarah," Jennifer said, keeping her arm around her daughter's shoulders. "She's the reason I'm still alive. She saved my life and she's going to be staying with us for a while." Emma walked over to Sarah with the fearlessness of someone who'd been raised with confidence and security. "Thank you for saving my mum. How did you do it?" Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile Jennifer had seen from her. "I slapped her face and knocked her out of the way of a bullet. It was very dramatic." Emma's eyes went even wider. "That's amazing. You're like a superhero. Can I feel your baby kick?" And just like that, the tension broke. Sarah laughed and nodded, guiding Emma's small hand to her belly, where the baby was indeed kicking vigorously. Emma's face transformed with wonder, and Jennifer felt tears prick her eyes at the simple, human moment unfolding in front of her. Over the next week, as investigators continued their work and security protocols were refined, the three of them settled into an unlikely routine. Emma, on temporary leave from school, appointed herself Sarah's personal assistant, bringing her water, asking endless questions about pregnancy, reading aloud from books about babies that she'd ordered online. Sarah, in turn, seemed to bloom under the attention, her natural warmth and intelligence emerging from beneath the protective shell that street life had required. Jennifer watched them together and realized that Emma was learning lessons no boarding school could teach, that heroism comes in unexpected forms, that circumstances don't define character, that kindness bridges all divides. She was also watching Sarah discover something she'd lost during her months on the street: the simple joy of being treated as fully human, worthy of attention and care and respect. The breakthrough in the investigation came on day 9. The FBI, working with international partners, traced a series of shell companies and offshore accounts back to a consortium of oil executives who'd formed what amounted to a criminal enterprise designed to sabotage the renewable energy transition. The conspiracy involved executives from 4 major petroleum corporations, 2 investment firms heavily invested in fossil fuel infrastructure, and a network of contractors willing to do everything from industrial sabotage to assassination. The arrests happened simultaneously across 3 continents: Houston, London, and Dubai. The scope of the operation was staggering, involving hundreds of millions of dollars and dozens of conspirators. The attempted assassination of Jennifer Hayes had been just one operation among many, but Sarah's intervention had exposed the entire network. By refusing to look away, by acting when action was required, Sarah had inadvertently triggered the unraveling of one of the largest corporate criminal conspiracies in modern history. When Marcus and Jennifer learned the full extent of what Sarah's courage had exposed, they sat in stunned silence. Finally, Marcus spoke. "Sarah, you didn't just save Jennifer's life. You potentially saved countless others and exposed corruption that would have continued unchecked. You're a witness in what's going to be one of the biggest trials in corporate history." Sarah, sitting on the couch with Emma curled beside her, looked overwhelmed. "I just overheard a conversation and did what seemed right. I didn't mean to become part of something this big." "That's how it always happens," Jennifer said gently. "Regular people in extraordinary circumstances, making choices that ripple outward in ways they can't predict." "You're a hero, Sarah, whether you're comfortable with that word or not." With the immediate threat neutralized and the conspiracy exposed, the FBI began discussing next steps. Sarah would need to testify, which meant witness protection protocols and security measures that could last months or even years. But more immediately, she was 7 months pregnant and needed stable housing, medical care, and support for when the baby arrived. Jennifer and Marcus called a family meeting, including Emma, to discuss what came next. They gathered in the safe house living room on a quiet evening, the security detail outside giving them space for privacy. "Sarah," Jennifer began, "Marcus and I have been talking and we have a proposal. We want you to come live with us, not temporarily, but for as long as you need. We have more than enough space in our home, and we can provide security, medical care, and support for you and your baby. But more than that, We'd like to help you get back on your feet in a real way." Marcus picked up where Jennifer left off. "We'd like to cover your college tuition so you can complete your nursing degree. We'll provide childcare so you can attend classes. We'll help you build the life you were working toward before circumstances knocked you down. No strings attached, no expectations, except that you let us help." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Why would you do this? You don't owe me anything more than you've already given." "Because you deserve it," Emma said fiercely, with the absolute certainty of childhood conviction. "And because you're our friend now, and friends help each other." Jennifer smiled at her daughter, then turned back to Sarah. "Emma's right, but also because I've spent years sitting on charitable boards, writing checks to address homelessness and poverty, thinking I was making a difference. And maybe those checks did help in abstract ways, but you've taught me that real change happens person to person, relationship to relationship. I can't fix the entire system, but I can help you. And maybe if enough people help one person, really help them, we start to fix the system from the ground up." Sarah wiped her eyes, her hand resting on her belly where her baby was moving. "I don't know what to say except yes, and thank you. And I promise I won't waste this chance." "You couldn't waste it if you tried," Marcus said warmly. "You've already proven you have more courage and integrity than most people demonstrate in a lifetime." 2 weeks later, they moved from the safe house to the Hayes family home in Lincoln Park, a historic mansion that had been thoroughly secured, with state-of-the-art systems and round-the-clock security personnel. Sarah was given a suite of rooms on the second floor, overlooking the private garden, with space for a nursery adjacent to her bedroom. Emma immediately began helping Sarah decorate, the two of them spending hours online shopping for baby supplies, arguing good-naturedly about color schemes and themes. Jennifer arranged for Sarah to receive the best prenatal care available, and at her first appointment with the obstetrician, they learned she was having a girl. Sarah cried through the entire ultrasound, seeing her daughter's face on the screen, hearing the steady rhythm of her heartbeat, feeling the reality of new life and new possibilities. The trial preparations continued, with Sarah meeting regularly with federal prosecutors to prepare her testimony. The defense attorneys for the conspirators tried to discredit her, arguing that a homeless woman with no fixed address and questionable circumstances wasn't a reliable witness. But the prosecution had corroborating evidence from multiple sources, and Sarah's testimony, delivered with quiet dignity and unshakable certainty, proved devastating to the defense. 3 months after the assassination attempt, Sarah gave birth to a healthy baby girl she named Hope Jennifer Mitchell, the middle name honoring the woman whose life she'd saved and who'd transformed hers in return. Jennifer was in the delivery room, holding Sarah's hand through contractions, coaching her breathing and crying alongside her, when Hope emerged into the world with a loud, indignant cry. Marcus, Jennifer, and Emma became Hope's godparents in a small ceremony at their home, surrounded by the unlikely family they'd formed. Emma, now 12, took her role as honorary big sister with absolute seriousness, learning to change diapers, mastering the art of bottle feeding, and spending hours simply holding Hope and marveling at her tiny perfection. Sarah enrolled in community college that fall, taking a reduced course load while caring for Hope. The Hayes family provided a full-time nanny to help with childcare, but Sarah insisted on being the primary caregiver, balancing her studies with motherhood with the same determination she'd shown in surviving on the streets. She was no longer invisible, no longer dismissed, no longer forced to fight for basic dignity, but she never forgot what that invisibility felt like, and she carried it with her like a compass, pointing toward the person she wanted to become. Jennifer, for her part, transformed her charitable work from writing checks to direct action. She created a foundation specifically focused on helping homeless individuals transition to stable housing and employment, but with a twist. Every program was designed and run by people who'd experienced homelessness themselves. Sarah became a consultant to the foundation, bringing insights that no policy expert or academic could provide. Together, they built programs that treated homeless individuals not as problems to be solved, but as people with agency, dignity, and potential. Hayes Energy Corporation completed its renewable energy transition over the next 2 years, surviving lawsuits, political pressure, and market challenges. The trial of the conspirators resulted in multiple convictions and prison sentences that sent a clear message: violence in service of corporate interests would not be tolerated. Marcus and Jennifer became outspoken advocates for both sustainable energy and social justice, using their platform and resources to push for systemic change. 5 years after Sarah slapped Jennifer Hayes in front of the Metropolitan Convention Center, saving her life and exposing a vast criminal conspiracy, the two women stood together at Sarah's nursing school graduation. Sarah, now a registered nurse with job offers from multiple prestigious hospitals, held Hope's hand as she walked across the stage to receive her diploma. The little girl, now 5 years old and full of curiosity and joy, cheered louder than anyone when her mother's name was called. Emma, now 16 and every bit as fierce as her mother, stood between Jennifer and Marcus, watching the ceremony with tears streaming down her face. "Mom," she whispered, "do you ever think about what would have happened if Sarah had walked past that day? If she'd decided it wasn't her problem?" Jennifer put her arm around her daughter. "I think about it all the time. I wouldn't be here. You'd have grown up without a mother, and Sarah and Hope might still be on the streets, trapped in a system that had made them invisible. One moment of courage changed everything for all of us." "No," Marcus corrected gently. "One moment of courage revealed what was already there: Sarah's character, your mother's capacity for real change, our family's ability to see beyond our privilege. Sarah didn't change who she was that day. She showed us who she'd always been, and she gave us the gift of seeing clearly." After the ceremony, they gathered at the Hayes home for a celebration. Sarah's nursing school friends mingled with Jennifer's business associates, with Emma's classmates, with Hope's kindergarten friends. It was a party that crossed every social boundary, bringing together people who never would have shared space if not for the unlikely friendship at its center. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Sarah found Jennifer standing alone in the garden, looking up at the Chicago skyline glowing against the darkening sky. "Thank you," Sarah said simply, standing beside her, "for everything, for seeing me when I was invisible, for giving me a chance when I had nothing, for being family when I thought I'd lost that forever." Jennifer turned to her friend, this woman who'd saved her life and taught her how to truly live. "I should be thanking you. You didn't just save my life that day, Sarah. You showed me how to use it for something that matters. You taught me that real heroism isn't about money or power or status. It's about doing the right thing when it would be easier to look away. You taught me how to be brave." They stood together in comfortable silence, two women from impossibly different worlds, connected by a moment of crisis and sustained by genuine friendship and mutual respect. Hope ran past them, chasing Emma through the garden, their laughter ringing out in the evening air. And in that moment, both women understood the same truth. Sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. Sometimes heroes don't look like we expect them to. And sometimes the greatest gift we can give or receive is simply to truly see each other. Thank you for being here and experiencing Sarah and Jennifer's story with me. If this touched your heart, I hope you'll subscribe to our channel because we're building something special here, a community that believes in the power of human connection, the importance of seeing each other's humanity, and the transformative nature of courage and kindness. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had an encounter with someone experiencing homelessness that changed your perspective? Or maybe you've been on the other side, invisible to people who used to see you. Your stories matter to this community, and they help us all grow in empathy and understanding. What lesson did you take from Sarah and Jennifer's journey? Was it about courage, about seeing the invisible, about how one moment can change everything? Drop your thoughts below. I read every comment, and your insights often teach me as much as any story I share. If you found value in this video, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes the stories we share have the power to open hearts and change minds, one person at a time. Until next time, keep seeing the humanity in everyone you meet, and remember, Heroes walk among us every day, often in the most unexpected forms.